welcome back to video classes by Kannur English Medium School. We were discussing the portrait of a lady written by Khushwant Singh. So far in this essay we understood the relationship between Khushwant Singh and his grandmother was a very friendly one. So they were like good friends with each other. And Khushwant Singh was left to live with his grandmother because his parents had gone to a city looking for better prospects in their life. Maybe they were trying to set up a business. So they had left Khushwant Singh under the care of his grandmother. And the grandmother did a very fantastic job in taking care of her grandson, Khushwant Singh. So she took him to the temple where the school was. The school was not separate from the temple, it was attached to the temple. And she packed his stationery like slate and ink pot and other things. She would wrap them in a bundle and then hand it to him every morning. She would prepare everything for him, and they would also carry some chapati with them on the way to just feed the dogs. So their routine was pretty much done together. Everything that the grandmother did, Khushwant Singh was there with her. So their relationship was very amiable, very friendly, and they were so comfortable with each other. But will that relationship stay the same? We'll see that, yes? When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. Now, so it so happened that Khushwant Singh's parents, who had gone to look for better prospects in a city, they had finally settled down well there. So they decided that they should now ask Khushwant Singh and Khushwant Singh's grandmother to join them in the city. So until now, the parents lived in the city, grandmother and Khushwant Singh lived in a village. But now, the grandmother and Khushwant Singh, they both have to move to the city to live with Khushwant Singh's parents. That was a turning point in our relationship, says Khushwant Singh. So this shifting from village to the city to go and live with his parents for Khushwant Singh and his grandmother's relationship was a turning point. What is a turning point? Turning point is a moment in time where things change. They don't remain the same. So does that mean that Khushwant Singh's and grandmother's relationship is going to change them? Will there be some sort of disturbance between them? Let's go ahead and find out. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. So when they moved to the city house, Khushwant Singh and the grandmother were given the same room. That's where they spent their time, and they slept in the same room, yes? And they were happy about that because that's how they were when they lived in the village house. However, now they didn't meet each other very often, and she didn't go to his school like she always did in the village. Why? I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. This is because he no longer went to a temple school. In a city there were proper schools, right? English medium schools. So he went to an English medium school. So there was a bus that used to come and pick him up every day and drop him back home. And of course, there was no opportunity for anybody to feed the dogs on the streets because there were no stray dogs on the streets of the city. It was a well-maintained city. So the grandmother couldn't join him on his way to school because the school bus would not accept anyone else other than the students, right? And so that was a big change in the relationship. So now the dogs were not there to feed. She decided to feed the sparrows at the house. There were lots of sparrows, so she would now feed the sparrows in the courtyard of the city house. And the courtyard means the frontal open area in the house. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. So as the years rolled by, we're not talking about weeks and months here. Fast forward the time, years have rolled by. Few years have passed, And now Khushwant Singh and grandmother do not meet each other often, even though they live in the same house and the same room, share the same room. For some time she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me, and I would tell her English words and little things about Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. So, like she did when they lived in the village house, she continued to take care of Khushwant Singh. She would wake him up, she would remind him to eat on time, take bath on time, get some sleep, etc. She did all that. However, when he came back from school, she would ask him what he learned on that day at school. And in English medium schools, they don't teach you the scriptures, right? They have a syllabus. There is a government approved syllabus. So you have different subjects like you study in your school. So it was not Ramayana or Mahabharata or the Bhagavad Gita or stotras or shlokas there. They had subjects, and the subjects had their own syllabuses to be completed throughout the academic year. So he was studying science, he was studying physics, of course, chemistry, things like that, mathematics. So when she asked him, when grandmother asked him what he studied that day at school, he would tell her whatever he studied. Terms related to science, he would say, for example, Grandma, today we studied gravity. Today we talked about Archimedes' principle. Today we learned that the world, the earth is spherical, it's not flat. Things like that. And those were the things that grandmother did not approve of. For her, school and study and learning means learning scriptures, yes, learning stotras and shlokas, like a typical traditional family. So she was unhappy about the things that he was being taught at school. She could not help me with any lessons. And while a priest taught scriptures at school for children in the village, those scriptures were something grandmother already knew. Those lines, those stotras written in Sanskrit, she already knew them. So if Khushwant Singh had some difficulty in learning a particular stotra or shloka, she was there to help him. She could actually. But now what can she do with the scientific concepts like gravity and Archimedes' principle? She was unable to help him, so she felt very bad about that. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and scriptures. She was not at all happy about the things that he was learning in this new school, English school, because there was no discussion and no teaching about God and scriptures in that school. She was not happy, but she said nothing. She was silent. Silent disapproval. You know, we have already talked about this. The grandmother did not nag. She did not, pester her grandson. She didn't complain. But when she didn't like something, she would just be silent. And that silence meant disapproval. Disapproval means, I do not like this. So that's the message she gave him by keeping silent about the things he was learning at school. She did not complain, but he knew that she was not happy about those things that he was learning at school. She rarely talked to me after that. So for a few years she tried to, keep company with him and catch up with what he was learning at school. But the more she tried, the more disappointed she was, because everything he was learning was meaningless to her. It was something she could not approve of. So instead she started remaining silent. So she let him be by himself. So that means for the days to come, even though they lived in the same room, in the same house, they did not talk to each other much. And there was nothing Khushwant Singh could do for her either, because he knew she was a person who believed in the older ways of teaching and things that were taught in temple schools. He cannot change that, because now he is learning in a city school. So things are not going to change in a way that she would be happy. So both of them accepted the truth that this was something that cannot be changed. So they reduced to talking to each other naturally. So that's how moving to a city house from the village house turned to be a turning point in the relationship between grandmother and Khushwant Singh. How are things going to progress? Is this going to continue like this? Will the grandmother and Khushwant Singh become more distant from each other? Will they completely stop talking to each other? Will there be any arguments between them over things that are happening in Khushwant Singh's life as he grows up? Well, that's going to be interesting to know, but we will do that in the next video class.